Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Welcome back for episode 2 of our 7th annual Oscar series, where subject matter experts discuss the nominees in their category of expertise. And new for this season, we are also publishing the video of our conversation. If you're an audio listener, you can find us on YouTube. If you're only discovering us on YouTube for the first time, I hope you enjoy the show. Today's category is Achievement in Visual Effects. Let me introduce my guests. Ken Seki, your visual effects credits include The Matrix Revolutions, Superman Returns, and Iron Man. Welcome back to Below the Line.
Hey, it's great to be back.
Also returning is Chris Batty. Chris, your credits include A Wrinkle in Time, Creed 2, and Aquaman. And you're a member of the Visual Effects Society, abbreviated as VES, which is the visual effects equivalent of SAG or the DGA. Nice to see you again.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be back.
Glad to have you both here. We're going to get right into it. The 2025 visual effects nominees are Avatar: Fire and Ash, F1, Jurassic World Rebirth, The Lost Bus, and Sinners. We're going to discuss them in that order, and spoilers are possible, so consider this a warning. When we talk about each film, I'm going to recognize the individual nominees by name. For visual effects, we get a lot of names, so please accept my apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. My guests, of course, are also welcome to correct me, which makes you guys equally responsible for what we do. Let's get into it. First up, Avatar: Fire and Ash. The nominated team is Joe Lettery, Richard Bainham, Eric Sindon, and Daniel Barrett.
All right. So Avatar: Fire and Ash has to be considered the front runner. It's definitely the movie with the most visual effects and the biggest budget. Although you could say this year, as opposed to The Way of Water, there's only been 3 years between the two. And so there was when Avatar 1 came out, there was a good 13 years where they developed all new technology to basically rewrite their pipeline to make Avatar at a whole new level. Now, what they've done here is they've done some new stuff in this film, but the question really is, if the novelty of going to Pandora has worn off, can some of these other films sneak in? It's a really interesting question, Chris.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's been some advancements in the Avatar for as far as like the fire, of course, and a lot of the facial animation tools and simulations to get that very subtle performances. But we're getting into the granular at this point for James Cameron and his team. So yeah, I'm really curious to see what the Academy thinks.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with that. Is this going to be a case of Lord of the Rings style win where every film wins? Or is there a chance that somebody could come in and knock it off the peak? You know, it has 3,350 VFX shots. It has 2,600 facial animation shots. There are 30 speaking characters. These are all advancements over the last iteration of Avatar. You know, and when you think of actual advancements in the technology, the facial capture and the muscle system use a new neural network to use machine learning to figure out the solves for all that simulation and all that motion capture. And those are subtle advancements over what we saw in the previous film. In addition, you've got these more shots, I think, with the human character Spike right next to the Avatar characters, which are seamless. It should also be pointed out, of all the nominees, this is the only one that uses stereoscopic images, meaning dual images in stereo, as well as high frame rate. And so the number of images and the quality and the size of the images is substantially more than any of the other nominees.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I mean, it's, meant to be seen in something like IMAX, high frame rate, and so those shots just have to hold up, and they certainly do. A lot of the details incredible, and like you say, that sort of the melding of actual real actors with our Navi, totally seamless. Like you just buy it, that they're there on the same ground. touching each other.
Mm.
It's pretty fantastic what these guys can do.
It's amazing to think that in this film alone there are 1,200 fire shots, and then the Lost Bus, which is also Nami, there's 1,400 visual effects shots. So just in the fire, it's almost the same number as a nominee in for their entire shot count. So you do the math on that, you're like the quantity is overwhelming. So and the success of the lift is pretty substantial. But then you also have to say we as an audience know it's not a real world. And so there's a little bit of buying it that you kind of go along for that journey, whereas almost all the other nominees are in the real world. Even if you were to say like Jurassic World is world building and Sinners is going back in time, they're all things that we can sort of understand and place in the real world. And so I think that that is also another consideration for Academy voters is how much does that world building matter? I think you have talked about how fantasy versus the reality with a fantastic story or fantastical story really is the sort of fight that we have on our hands.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, that kind of splits down not only the nominees, but I think visual effects work in general. Like, I mean, are you in the Avatar, Star Wars, or even Marvel world where
Yep.
everything is incredible and these things just do not exist, and you're sort of creating the world around you versus, like our next nominee, like F1, which is grounded, real world stuff. Everyone believes it. And so those are like two philosophies and they all have their challenges. And then so yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, I think, with Avatar being the third film,
Yeah. It,
and
it should
see if it can hold
it should
hold that excitement.
it should also be noted while we talk about CG and the world building, they shoot a lot of very practical special effects. There's a massive 250-gallon hydraulic wave pool they built in Manhattan Beach for the underwater stuff. There is a 10-ton motion-based system for all the ship stuff that they shot in New Zealand that has a six-axis gimbal that's been, motion-based controlled. So they do plenty of actual real world stuff as well as the CG.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Yeah. It's interesting and being like a sort of older and almost jaded professional where you see Avatar and in a sense you're like, okay, here we go again. But when you see the film and when you see the reels that they send out, you just can't deny it.
Yeah.
Like you say, can't like it's like almost all the other films, all the other techniques, all the other challenges all rolled into one.
Yeah.
So
It
yeah, we'll
really
see.
is. They have the advantage of time in terms of doing a multiple films and being able to project out and budget. They have a fairly unlimited budget when you think about it.
All right. Well, that'll
Well,
move us on to the second film on our list.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
guys are good to go? You good?
yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Next up, F1. The nominated team is Ryan Tudhope, Nicholas Chevalier, Robert Harrington, and Keith Dawson.
F1. So this is going again, sort of contrasting the sort of fantastical world with the real world stuff. And this type of film is kind of almost the opposite of why I got into visual effects in the in the first place, where, I was as a kid, you're sort of excited by like Star Wars and sort of creating things that are just impossible. But here, you're really sort of grounded in this reality of F1 racing, which is, 200 mile per hour reality. But I mean, it all really exists and these people do these things. And so it's really exciting to see the extent of what these guys can kind of use visual effects to heighten that storytelling. They had a lot of picture cars. They sort of built their own cars. They had like six cars that they practically built with like these camera rigs. Um, but then all that had to be sort of augmented, with visual effects to sort of put the actors in. They basically had two strategies. One is they worked with F1 to get actual racing footage, real racing footage, and then they could put their story cars, the Apex GP cars, into that footage, or they shot real plates and then they could put augment augment their own footage that way, and then a mixture of both. And then of course there's like the fully CG shots. But it really just started with sort of grounding it all in reality by like scanning all the race courses and scanning the cars and being able to swap the cars out for each footage. So yeah, I think with all this stuff, it really starts with just studying and getting plenty of reference and really knowing that material. Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
I think you could relate this to another Kosinski film, and that is Top Gun Maverick. In
Mhm.
terms of like, it's almost a victim of its own success. It is so well done that you do not realize it's a visual effect. And sometimes that works against you in this category because it's so good and so seamless. You just buy the realism. And to talk about the techniques used here, it's actually pretty extraordinary. The cameras they developed to shoot this are all custom built for the film. And this is a place where the integration of visual effects with the practical and with the cinematographer, Claudio Miranda, really came into play, is they actually simulated all these camera positions on the mounts and on the car and previs them, meaning pre-visualization, the field that Chris and I come from. And they checked out all of those angles and ran them down racetracks and allowed Claudio and Joseph Kosinski to like buy off on them. And then they manufactured those actual cameras. And so there's that whole level of pre-production where visual effects can help determine some of those choices. And I thought that was an interesting sort of side note. There are 2,500 visual effects shots in the film. And,
Mhm.
visual effects is interesting because there's a lot of emphasis on how there's no visual effects or no CG in a lot of campaigns. And it hurts films like Top Gun and F1 because they are spectacular visual effects because you can't tell. And it feels like Brad Pitt is actually driving the car, and they reskin these cars. They had F3 cars that they converted into F1 cars seamlessly. They took tracks that were not the same track, that it turned it into a different track because they LiDAR scanned 6 different tracks, meaning they made 3D models of scanned models of 6 tracks with textures that they could project back on, and they could rerun the simulation of the actual race. And all the crashes were based on real crashes, and they extracted telemetry data from those crashes and they put them into the CG version so that they would react and move in a realistic fashion. And these are things that you would not know unless someone told you that. Like these are the spectacular effects that are in this film. If you look at, for example, the rain sequence, all the rain is dry for wet. There was no
Mhm.
rain happening in that was all CG rain added to that crash sequence that wasn't there when they
Yeah.
shot it. And that becomes a safety issue. They probably wouldn't have shot that crash. Was it actually raining? So this is a place where visual effects really works hand in hand with the practical things.
And that's also the one of the tracks that they had to swap out because they had done some initial plate photography actually on the Monza course. But when they had Brad Pitt and the rest of the cast and they went back, that 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 racetrack was unavailable. So they had to shoot somewhere else, and then using their sort of um, that sort of pre-done footage that they shot, they were able to swap it out in comp. And so, and then that also they developed that sort of swapping the cars out where they could, project one car on top of another car that allowed Kaczynski to kind of in the edit kind of restructure the race a bit. So he
Yeah.
was able to pick new shots that were, maybe told the story more clearly or more exciting, but the continuity of the cars were wrong. So they were just like, oh, well, that's fine. We'll just swap the cars out
Yeah.
and make sure that
The
it all kind of
reskinning
makes
is
sense in the
extraordinary.
edit.
Yeah, the reskin. I have to
Yeah.
agree.
So,
It's amazing.
just and it's all like you say, Kent. It's really hard to figure out sometimes there's some fantastic crashes with your with your cast in the car, and obviously that's going to be CG. But so other times it's just
But they,
it's incredible. In fact, the one of the last shots of the film got a lot of criticism for being, a standout CG shot with the team celebrating their victory and the fireworks in the background. And this one was called out like, "Oh my God, you did such great effects, and these shots are terrible. But it turns out those were all in camera. There's like not even.
Real
It's
wasn't
just
as good as CG in that
yeah,
one
it's
shot.
exactly right. It's just the lighting and all that stuff. It kind of looks like a comp, and it was
Yeah,
like, no,
just
that's
the way
how
it
they
looked.
that's how it is. It was all captured in camera.
I did an interview with the first AD from this film, and we talked about how some of their scheduling issues were affected by the strike and losing actors and what they
Mm.
were able to film. And as far as trying to follow along with the schedule of the actual races, I don't think it came up in our conversation, but it's very interesting that visual effects was able to help bridge that gap as far as collecting footage at different times, but putting it seamlessly together. As to your point, it really is seamless in this film.
Yeah. I think that that we sometimes we lose fact of this we lose sight of the fact that visual effects are supposed to support the storytelling and support the actual production of the show. Like everyone works together, and this is a great example, I think, of where visual effects could allow the filmmaker to alter some footage or use footage in a way that he did not realize at the time they shot it, without having to go back to incur huge costs to reshoot or impossible setups, to like go back and redo it again. So I think it's a real achievement in visual effects.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. Certainly, I agree. Yeah, this one could be one of our usurpers of the Avatar, I believe.
Yeah, I could see this one really taking it if Oscar voters really realize what was done here and take the time to understand it. I think it could lay claim for that title.
Well, we'll move on to the third film on our list. I don't think anyone's going to confuse this for real life. Jurassic World Rebirth. And the visual effects team is David Vickery, Stephen Applin, Charmaine Chan, and Neil Corbould.
So with Jurassic World, you can't help but talk about dinosaurs because it's all about dinosaurs. And almost everyone I know that's our age has an experience seeing Jurassic Park for the first time and how revolutionary it was to see CG dinosaurs and really well done CG dinosaurs. What's been fascinating about this Oscar campaign for Jurassic World is the emphasis on the invisible effects that they've made. Like at the Oscar Bake Off, which I attended for visual effects, they really did put an emphasis, for example, on the Molosar sequence, which is the one shot on the ocean in which the boat is tracking the Molosar and is sort of being attacked by it, and then they have the Spinosaurus later. But what most people don't realize is that most of that scene was shot on a gimbal in Malta with no ocean. And that a lot of the shots, all of the backgrounds were just replaced. And it's so well done that you think, oh, they shot on the ocean with like ship to ship or with drones, and then they just added the dinosaur, right? But that's actually, they added a lot more than the dinosaur. Or for example, in the T-Rex rafting scene, that was shot in two locations, in Thailand and then in the UK, of all places, at a whitewater rafting center. And it was so cold that the actors had to wear wetsuits. And then the CG artists had to, like the compositors and the CG artists had to paint out and essentially replace their arms of the actors. And you don't realize, you obviously think that the dinosaurs CG, but the entire environment's replaced. And so those two scenes were two that were really emphasized at the Bake Off. And I think that's because there was a feeling from that team that maybe even though they made advancements in the dinosaurs, which they also talked about, these two were the top two things they talked about and discussed. And I think it's worth mentioning that that is the case because sometimes those are the overlooked things. Like we talked about F1 just now, about how the visual effects are overlooked. And I think that's a great example of things that were overlooked maybe initially by Oscar review or by audiences that would never realize that that's the case.
Yeah, completely can't. I mean, yeah, there's like I see 10% of the shots used real water in that whole boat scene. And so, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. And so they had to kind of come up with, new simulations of the waters and like the drips on the arms and the flippers and all that stuff. And so it's really interesting work with that. But then also um, the opening of the film is almost completely CG as well.
Yeah,
Right? When
100%. Yeah.
they're establishing that island, establishing the environment. So even though they went to Thailand and shot a lot of plates, Apparently, there was some difficulty, and they weren't allowed to shoot real animals.
Yeah, the
I'm not
monkeys,
entirely sure.
the monkeys look like a National Geographic monkeys, and you would just
Yeah,
think, oh,
but
they
they're
just shot some monkeys, and they just, but those are all
just
CG. You know, like
100% CG. Yeah, everything that's completely. Uh, which is interesting because Gareth Edwards is kind of known for going to real locations and just sort of shooting, and then the visual effects are kind of built in. He doesn't even use blue screens a lot of the time.
yeah.
So this one, well, there was a real mix and match of that sort of strategy of going to a real place and then augmenting versus, having to shoot on like these huge sort of mechanical gimbals and or on stage sets and
With the
or the
volume, right?
white
There's
water.
like
Yeah, so it's a real mishmash. Oh, it's also shot on film too. He really wanted to shoot on film.
we
So
talked
that's
about
another
Gareth
complexity.
maybe a couple years ago with the Creator, and
Hmm.
how successful that
Mm.
film was with the CG
Mhm.
integration with the backgrounds. And I think that he is a filmmaker that really understands sort of what he wants to do and what he can get away with. There was a lot of during the Creator campaign. There was a lot of sort of side not side eye is the wrong word. There was a lot of discussion about how like the visual effects the supervisor would get caught out about stuff that, oh, you can do that and you can do this. And so I'm sure that the answer was yes, they could do it, but maybe not as cheaply as Gareth may have thought. But I mean, I think having a director that knows visual effects is a good thing and a bad thing, at least for the visual effects supervisor and producer, because they will push the envelope. And Gareth Edwards is definitely someone who would push the envelope. I think that if you terms of creature effects, this film features these mutated dinosaurs. Like so they it's not bad enough that we get attacked by velociraptors and T-Rexes. We now have these mutated monster dinosaurs. And I think that the skin shader that featured more translucent, so they had to rewrite that. And so there's things like that advance that maybe the casual viewer may not notice about the dinosaurs because now that you've seen dinosaurs so many times, you're like take it for granted. But I think that that has to be noted is that the realism or the ability to like push the boundaries of what the creatures look like only happens every time they make one of these films, and it requires them to like do something different. And so this one does feature that level of detail and sort of upping the ante, so to speak, over what was done before and the previous Jurassic Park movies or Jurassic World movies now that we're in this new franchise of Jurassic.
It's interesting
Yeah,
to think about the
exactly. Yeah,
campaign.
it's. Mhm. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead, Skid.
you can go, Chris. If you like, go. You can say finish your thought.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with Kent. Like, we've kind of pushed this franchise forward and forward, and so they're trying to dream up new ways to sort of wow the audience. And it's funny too because that's sort of the theme of the movie and the story itself is that, the world has sort of lost interest in dinosaurs
That's
and
right.
they're sort of dying and they can only survive in the around the equator. And so, it's sort of curious that we have to push even for the audience at home, right? We have to push the dinosaurs into this crazy mutated
Yeah.
world.
The dinosaurs are boring
And
now
but they
in the
look,
movie.
yeah, but they look great too. I mean, it's all that sort of translucent skin, and they wrote new tools about the sort of subtle wrinkling of all of
Yeah.
it that can be both sort of accurately simulated, but also art directed by the animator, so to make
Yeah.
sure it like looks right. And so, but again, it's almost like Avatar. We're starting to push into subtlety where a lot of the audiences probably don't even
Yeah.
know what's
They
happening.
were complaining about the wrinkles last movie.
Well, I
Exactly.
was going to comment on the idea of marketing this for Oscars, and even more than your general audience, your folks who are voting at least have some higher
Yeah.
degree of understanding of these things. However, if you just come in with look at the work we did on dinosaurs and you said, even though it's incrementally better and more technologically advanced, if you started with that, I think people might be more dismissive. But the fact that you start your campaign, as you pointed out, Kent, with the invisible effects and the water work and these things that
Yeah.
you don't notice, then you can say, and we also made advancements on the dinosaurs in a way that I think sets it up stronger as a voter, not me personally, but as a voter, I'm more receptive to looking at the whole package than just being dismissive of the
Uh,
dinosaurs.
Yeah, I think it's something that people sort of don't consider in all this. And by the way, they don't have to. The average person doesn't need to. But there is a huge strategy behind all of these films. And how do you get the nomination? And like there is a push, there is a talking points thing that comes out that they discussed and figured out like this is our way in. And I think for Jurassic World, they were smart. They said, hey, look, even though we made advancements on these creatures, let's talk about this other stuff that maybe people don't realize we did, and that may, wow some of, especially in the visual effects branch, them onto our side.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to the fourth film on our list. That is The Lost Bus. The visual effects team is Charlie Noble, David Zaretti, Russell Bowen, and Brandon K. McLaughlin.
So the Lost Bus, yeah, this one's really interesting, kind of maybe the dark horse of the nominees. Like Kent had said previously, there's 1,400, over 1,400 visual effect shots in here. And it's sort of another real world movie. It's portraying real world, real events with real people that went through these like harrowing events of this bus trying to make its way out of the campfire. And so again, they started by just like heavy duty research. They found a lot of footage. The actual teacher, Mary, who was on the bus, had filmed some stuff apparently and sort of handed that over so they could study it and figure out what that experience was like. And so it's a really interesting film too, after seeing a lot of the sort of behind the scenes and effects reels that were sent in. I was kind of amazed at the amount of shots there were and which shots were actually CG, because they had to shoot. Obviously, they couldn't shoot in Paradise because that's still pretty fire damage. So they shot in New Mexico outside of Santa Fe. And so they basically had to take a lot of those shots of real practical, like the bus or just real practical shots of their set, and then change it into Paradise and what Paradise looked like at the time. So a lot of the vegetation and trees had to be changed out and added. And so there's a lot of that work that goes in. And then also with the fire stuff, I mean, it's sort of incredible what they've done. They started again with practical elements, a lot of like gas and propane fires, so they can get some of the lighting. Even the characters' interaction, they would talk about sort of the benefit of having like some practically controlled fires is, you sort of naturally put your hand up and sort of avoid that heat. And so you get real interaction. But, with that kind of thing, with those sort of stunt fires, they obviously burn cleanly without smoke. And so all that has to be augmented. But yeah, so it's sort of an incredible endeavor to sort of try to portray this. And this one is like very emotional too, so you have to sort of keep up that intensity all the time. Yeah, so there was a lot. It's pretty impressive.
So if you look at equivalents in past Oscar races, you're looking at like films similar to like The Hereafter portrayed the tsunami very effectively. Twister, the original Twister, showing a tornado in effect, and A Perfect Storm. So these sort of natural disaster type films generally get a lot of attention, and so that's one reason why this is in the category that it is, has made the nomination. Also, Paul Greengrass as a filmmaker, is a very good filmmaker, and his style of handheld long takes also presents many challenges for the visual effects team. Oftentimes with those kind of handheld long takes, you're not sure exactly what he's going to shoot. And so you have to plan for the inevitable of everything. And so longer takes are harder. Handheld is harder. You end up having to do quite a bit of extra work just to get to the place where you can add the fire. All the fires replaced, all the embers, all the smoke, everything is actually added in. And I think that is a very heavy lift on a tighter budget than some of these other films that we're going to talk about. It probably has the lowest budget, visual effects budget, of any of the films that we're talking about. And so within the category of visual effects, that presents its own set of issues. Like you don't have as much money, you don't have an unlimited budget to develop brand new tools, even though you will never have to develop tools and techniques to get the job done. And you can compare fire in the Lost Bus to fire in Fire and Ash and Avatar, and say, well, which one do you think is more successful? And you could make the argument for both. The campfire, it's hard because there's so much footage now, especially with the LA fires from last year, of fire burning. What does that look like? What does an uncontrollable, huge fire look like? You know what that looks like. And while Fire and Ash does use simulation and did actually burn stuff in practical terms for reference, like it is slightly different in how it's being portrayed. And the character of the fire, I mean, the villain in the Lost Bus is the fire, right? Like we literally have this thing that's happening that it has to have a characteristic. You can even tell from the way they shot some of these full CG shots of the fire moving through sort of the environment. Like that's the character of the fire sort of, expanding
Mhm.
through its embers and sort of throwing out. And so it's giving this anthropomorphic quality, which isn't realistic in the camera movement in some ways, but it is supposed to be indicative of how the fire is moving. So you're giving this movie a life, or this character of fire a life that is beyond what we normally perceive as fire. And I think that is an achievement in it of itself, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I like how you sort of touched upon like who is the villain of the Lost Bus, and it's definitely the fire, and because they had talked about it sort of doing these like Jaws like cameras, like these POV cameras of the fire sort of stalking them, and or the ember cam, they
Yeah.
also call it. The ember is sort of flying out and spreading that fire, and how it sort of kind of bears down on them and sort of closes them off. So that, yeah, it's like an interesting thing, and it sort of contrasts, that camera style and that of work sort of contrasts Paul Greengrass's more sort of grounded
Yep.
handheld camera
100%.
work. So that it's like interesting, and that also leads to another thing that some of the guys on the film were talking about. Is like incidental visual effects. So due to the fact of the shooting style is sort of more organic and handheld, and long lensy, you had to kind of fill in the fire and the smoke in these cameras that were just sort of panning around and following. And so it wasn't a highlighted thing, and so that kind of makes it hard, where you have to kind of make sure everything feels consistent,
Yep.
and the tension's held up, but you're putting the fire back in this like shaky, blurry, area of the frame, and sort of tracking in. And it can be very challenging to sort
Yep.
of make it live within the frame and not call attention to itself, but it still has to be there.
Yep.
And so those are always hard shots.
I think it's always hard to make a historically realistic fire. It tends to look fake. And so like that is something that has always been fairly challenging in the CG, because it requires a lot of computational might to do the simulation.
Mhm.
And then there's fluid dynamics involved, and then you have to marry it to the what's actually there at the day they shoot it. So that's always challenging.
And so while we're talking about some of the uses of camera and sort of that um, character building with the fire, as you were, is that really where the press is, or have there been technological advances in fire as well? Because it's been a while that people have said you don't need to use real fire. Visual effects is good enough compared to many years ago when, to your point, Ken, it looked kind of fake.
Yeah.
Are we seeing advancement on both? Is this really a culmination of advancement, or is this really a very, very effective application of what visual effects can do with fire for this film?
I mean, I would characterize it as a variety of techniques they've used that have built over the years, for sure. Like even as short as like 5, maybe 10 years ago, it was hard to do fire. It was very challenging, especially color space wise, like the technical aspects of getting fire to appear correctly in a composite was pretty challenging. And I think over the years they have gotten the studios have gotten much better. The software has gotten much better, much faster, and also the idea of like how to use the sim so it looks real, I think has gotten much better. The artists
Mhm.
themselves utilizing those tools have gotten much stronger at making fire appear correct. And I think the reference, a lot of this year's nominees talked about the reference, how important it's been,
Mhm.
and Lost Bus is no exception. in terms of like what does the smoke and fire look like of a giant out of control fire. They're constantly talking about it. Even in Avatar, they burned a hut to see with a flamethrower to see what that would look like because that's something they literally do in the movie. And so even with all the tools, the reference is the key to like making sure that you're correct. Because I think it's easy
Yeah,
not to get away from it.
totally. Yeah, there's like a philosophical difference that's sort of come up, and it's almost like in a way, like some of the backlash of visual effects from like 15 years ago has, I think, helped visual effects in that, using, like Kent says, they had like 90 minutes of different footage and reference of all the fires, and they categorized them, all the different ways the fires behave and different types of fire, and so they had like a library to follow, so everything becomes more grounded. And then again, like with the way Gareth Edwards shoots and the way Paul Greengrass shoots, it's like very grounded, and so you always have real world elements in the frame that you can match to, and it just sort of fits everything together. And I think that's really also helped in the past, 5, 10 years. And so, it's just a different way of working where I think, 20 years ago, we'd all be on just a green screen or blue screen stage and you'd shoot elements and then you just stick them in. And so it was like, it's a different way of working now,
Yeah.
which, it has its own challenges, but I think it's paying off.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to our fifth and last film. Although, when you guys talked about the fire being the villain, it did remind me of maybe one complaint about the film. And is if there is another antagonist in the film, it's Ruby, the school bus dispatch
Yeah.
supervisor.
The
Although,
dispatcher.
to be honest, if I had any complaint about the film, I think that the fire got more character development
Than
than
Ruby.
Ruby did over the course of the film. So yeah, the fire really grows and develops, and
Yeah.
starts to have more angles to it. While Ruby was kind of a single note character. Apologies to the real life woman that they were representing there. All right, our fifth and final film nominated for visual effects is Sinners, and the team is Michael Rowla, Espen Nordahl, Guido Walter, and Donnie Dean.
So I think Sinners is as a film, as a landmark film last year. It's genre bending. Ryan Coogler is definitely a visionary filmmaker in terms of like how he makes his movies, and you cannot deny his force in cinema history right now. Um, and what's interesting, and people may say, well, it's a vampire film. Is there really anything special here? I think that there's two places where it really is outstanding. And place number one is Michael B. Jordan with Michael B. Jordan. You cannot deny that the success of that visual effect is 100% believable and so well achieved that it supports the performance. And it reminds me of a film from a few years back that won the Oscar as a dark horse, and that was Ex Machina. If you recall in Ex Machina, Alicia Vikander gives a fantastic performance as the AI robot in that film. And the visual effects were all supporting her performance as a robot, basically painting out the back of her head to be and replacing with a CG sort of robot version of her and all of the replacements there. And it was a smaller film compared to what else was out that year, but it did support performance. And in this case, from the opening gun of this film, there's a 90-second shot of Michael B. Jordan smoking a cigarette, handing it over to himself and acting with himself, which is also a testament to Michael B. Jordan. So, like, if this were to win visual effects, in my mind, it is also a nod and a huge compliment to Michael B. Jordan for his performance, which he is up for Best Actor, I believe, in the acting category. Well deserved for being able to pull this off in this film. That would be my number one note about what makes this film special. Chris, is there something that you would add to that you want to say as a standout?
Yeah, I mean this is definitely the biggest advancement that they did. And I think to Ryan Coogler's credit, he was bold enough to do a shot like that at the very beginning because you would spend the first part of the film, the audience would just be going like, well, that's Michael B. Jordan and Michael B. Jordan. But like he just got it all done in one big shot where it's just they hand it off and you're like, oh, okay, we buy it. And then you don't really think of it as an effect anymore. Like you just buy that these guys are twins because again, Michael B. Jordan's performance is varied enough between the two brothers that it feels like two different people, and it's not like, you know, like an old Disney movie with the split screen. And so, yeah, I mean, and then they had that sort of technique of this halo rig, which is like a collar of cameras, like 10 or 12 cameras around him, so that as he's performing, they have all angles of his face, and then they can do facial replacement when they use the stunt double or a stand-in for the twin, depending on who's what. And then they can put Michael B. Jordan's face on top of that performance. And then, there was a lot of use of the techno dolly, which is like a special sort of motion control crane that can repeat moves so
Yeah.
that they could do both sides of the performance. And it's also interesting too, if you watch the before and afters, is he does a performance on one side for one brother, and then they use a stand-in for the other, and then they'll swap them. Um, but the performances that he does versus what the stunt double are pretty varied. And so it seems like he had a lot of freedom to kind of find his performance while they're doing takes. And so they had, and I'm sure that sort of posed its challenges, but it really helps sort of buying you that.
Yeah, makes it
And I think
natural.
that was well done. Well done
That
indeed.
halo rig technique was interesting because they also used a technique called Gaussian splat, in
Oh,
which
yeah.
normally what you do is you recreate the head in CG and with geometry. And with Gaussian splat, you're creating a volume, almost a point cloud of images that are projecting onto it that creates the illusion of volume, but isn't really there. And so that technique, it was a risky thing to do, to use the Gaussian splat technique to like create the head, to recreate the head that gives you all these views. That is a form. It's not quite photogrammetry, but it's like a distant cousin of photogrammetry as a technique in which photographs are used to project back onto geometry. This is creating a volumetric cloud, if you will, of the head that allows them to move around the head and to rotate around and use that in his performance. And I would say, oh yeah, yes.
Okay, so would you say that that's risky because it can look fake if it's not done perfectly right, or are there other risks that you're?
I'd say it's risky because it's a technique that's not fully figured out yet. It's
Mm.
like it's one of those newer techniques that I think could, if you don't use it correctly, you don't have much of a fallback. You have to recreate the head in CG, which I'm sure they had some fallback there. But I found that to be an interesting thing mentioned in the Bake Off, which I was like, oh, I didn't realize that you're using Gaussian splat. It's a technique that is gaining more momentum, but it is an interesting one to be called out in a major film being used successfully. I would also say that for me, the second standout effect is the 3-minute juke joint
Mhm.
sequence in which we go through time and Black history in one continuous take. It is a phenomenal shot comprised of 5 shots stitched together. It was prevised. Again, there's that word that the technique that Chris and I were specializing in 50 times with the composer Ludwig Göransson, which is because it's so tied to the music. So he was revising the music, and they were revising the shot, and it was all planned out before they had shot it. It's a 4800 oneer in 65 millimeter IMAX, which is
Mhm.
that alone is an achievement. But like, it's so successful in what it meant, what it means in the film, and what it means in terms of recording, Black history through the lens of music. I just think that effect, I remember watching and just being blown away by what I saw in that effect. And I just thought it was an amazing piece of filmmaking. If I had to pick the best oneer of last year, for me, that was the best oneer of last year, was the juke joint scene in Sinners. I think it was a standout. And I think they knew it when they were making it at the time, obviously, but it is super successful.
Yeah, it's really well done. And it's like fun to watch. And yeah, it's like I was trying to find a little bit more about that. I was curious, but yeah, it's like five different takes stitched together, which seems incredible. Like it just, it's a testament to their performances, right? And
Yeah,
timing and choreography that you can do it like that. And so, and the fact that all this stuff has to be done in 65 millimeter on the
oh
IMAX and
man,
held
yeah,
up to that scrutiny. There's a lot of set extensions with the train station and the cotton fields, and so there's a lot of again sort of invisible
yeah, effects.
visual effects throughout, and so then of course the vampire stuff, the creature effects. There was that the snake is a
Yeah,
fully CG,
the one that he
the
stabs
vultures,
on the
yeah,
truck.
on the truck.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's there's a lot in there. Once you get past the twinning, there's still a lot of visual effects in the
yeah,
film, and it's fun to watch. I mean, it's kind of interesting where Ryan Coogler is like just big spectacle Hollywood, but like fresh. Like
yeah.
it's just fun to go see. That's I really appreciate that,
I think his point. He has a unique point of view, and I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. Um, and I think here's where the Academy voters may go for him, go for this film. It is a performance-based solution, right? Like you come back to this. It is an acting, it is something that supports the acting, whether it's the juke joint sequence or it's
Mhm.
the twin of Michael B. Jordan. And I think that's a testament to the film itself, that is the emphasis of the visual effect. It's not a spectacle, not a spectacle for the sake of spectacle. And I think that does sway Oscar voters. So well, at least historically, we'll see if that's the case this time. But I think that it can make the argument for it, and just like an Ex Machina, and I think that's a good equivalent in terms of like maybe you wouldn't normally think of that as the film that would get visual effects, but you in that lens you can for sure see that, and I think that is an
Yeah,
interesting way to look at this nominee in the brand in this list of nominees.
It's outside the
yeah, I think
scope
that's
of
an
our
Yeah.
remit on this episode specifically, but it'll be interesting to see with Sinners if their record number of nominees is an indication of a wave that could help a lot of these technical categories across the finish
Mhm.
line, or if that number of nominees is going to be its own reward and people start to go in other directions. Again, not something we're going to answer, but it'll be curious
Sure.
to see how it sorts out.
Sure. I mean, like it's sometimes it's a curse to have too many nominations in a film, and you walk away with no wins. But I think to be nominated at all is a big deal, and it's a richly deserved. And I think the visual effects nomination is richly deserved in this film.
Yeah,
I was remember seeing this on the big screen. I wanted to see it on the big screen, and nowadays for me, that's part of what I love about these kinds of movies is if they're successful, I want to see them on a big screen, and like it promotes that experience, the communal experience. And I think that this is one of those films that definitely does that for sure. And Ryan Coogler talking about the different types of film, that amazing video that made the rounds of like and
oh yeah,
physically holding the different pieces and talking about what the formats are. I loved it. I thought that was great.
yeah, it's so good. Well, the enthusiasm that he has, this sort of is infectious, and it's
A
great.
hundred
Yeah, so
percent.
like when he's making a movie, you want to go see it. Like, I think F1 is like another one of those where you just want to go, and of course, like Avatar. So we have these like big movies that, it's just great. You want to go and sort of experience them in a theater with an audience.
Chris, I talked over you before. Was there anything you wanted to add on this before we wrap it up?
No, I was, just sort of thinking and sort of trying to put all these five in together and with Sinners is very sort of performance based. I guess you could argue like Avatar is too in a way, right? Where you have those actors and the visual effects is there just to sort of help push out the performance, when it comes to the Navi. And so, we'll see if that is still remembered in the Academy's voting. But I'm curious to see how this all shakes out this year.
Well, based on the insights you guys have shared, I feel like it's pretty clear that all 5 of these films have earned their nominations. But as we do every year, this is the point of the episode where we give a shout out to any films that might have been overlooked.
I love talking about train dreams. I know this is kind of a crazy thing to talk about in the visual effects category, but I think it's a testament to the cinematography and how successful it is that takes you into the world that is in the past. And it does things like set extensions and fire. There's a big fire. Talking about fire a lot in this episode of visual effects, but there's a fire in that scene, that movie is super successful. You just buy that it happens. And I think that subtlety, it's not, again, overlooked, but it's beautiful and amazing and super well done. I really enjoyed that film, and I think that is one of, I look back and I'm like, oh man, God, there must have been a lot of visual effects in that movie. I just didn't think about it when I watched it.
Yeah. It's also interesting this year, right, where we have some big superhero movies that were not, uh, you know,
Yeah,
didn't make the cut.
I think first
First
year
five.
we're not talking about one superhero movie. This is, I think, the first year that maybe that's happened in a long time, or maybe ever since I've been on the podcast.
And I
Like,
wasn't thinking
Yeah.
about that much, but there were some big superhero movies, the
I mean,
Fantastic Four and Superman, right? These are both
yeah.
2025 films.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of a surprise not to see them unless there's more going
Captain
on.
America too.
Only Superman made the Bake Off for the Oscar shortlist, and I was
Mm.
surprised that Fantastic Four didn't make it. I actually thought that one would make the list just because I thought the visual effects were really good, and it created a different world, a different look. Some would say it was like The Incredibles, but it still was like,
Yep.
I appreciated the world building in Fantastic Four, and I was surprised it didn't make the cut for the
Yeah,
shortlist.
that's the one that stands out to me because it is very sort of designed,
Yes.
and it has a look, but it's, part of that aesthetic. And and that I always sort of count that as a lot. You don't have to be super, super photo real all the time, but if you're going after a look, and you sort of achieve that, I think that's part of that storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting that didn't even make the shortlist cut. And that
Mhm.
and then Superman didn't make the 5. So
Well, we'll let that sort itself out with actual
Yeah.
voting in a couple of months.
Yep.
On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks for being here, guys. This was a lot of fun.
yeah, thank you, Skid.
Thank you so much. Awesome.
Well, we went long.
A little bit.
This is the second of a planned 13 episodes in this year's Oscar series, and I hope you'll stick with us. We'll be churning out new episodes right up until the ceremony on March 15th, so subscribe now if you haven't already so you can catch them all. If you're watching the YouTube video, let me know what you think. My email address is skid@belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z, and I'm always grateful for your feedback. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Wan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. To all of our listeners, I appreciate you. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.